This is a legacy episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast, originally released as part of the Lesbian Talk Show podcast group. Some references may be obsolete. The show looks at lesbian-relevant themes in history and literature, has interviews and discussions about current historical fiction with queer female characters, including fantastic versions of the past, and presents new original historical fiction for your enjoyment. Today, the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast welcomes Vanda to the show. Glad you could join us.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Vanda is the author of the Juliana series, about a young woman starting in 1940s New York City, following the progress of her show business career and her struggle to balance success and a forbidden romance. The third book, Paris Adrift, just came out in May. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about the characters and where you're taking them in this series.
Okay, well, the characters in this series are getting closer. Originally, the plan was in book 2 that Juliana is married. And the plan was for her and her husband to go to Paris and to revitalize Juliana's career, because her career had a dip. Alice, was staying back as her manager because she has other things to do in the States. But at the last minute, Richard, whose mother always is getting sick and that kind of stuff, has a heart attack. And he can't go. So Al has to go. And, of course, Richard apologizes because he's only bought one stateroom and he's only purchased one hotel room. And it's going to be so inconvenient for them. And, of course, it works out terrifically. At first, Juliana has a lot of trouble they both have some problems about being gay. Al is doing better with it, even though she was shocked when she first found out in the first book. But Juliana is struggling a lot, and she doesn't talk about the struggle, but she kind of acts out things. So when they're on the ship, they go on the United States that was the typical form of transportation in 1955. So they're there, and Juliana is nervous about being alone with Al in the stateroom. And she's acting out in certain ways. So they're not very close at that point. Al is expecting them to sleep together every night and all of this stuff, and that's not what happens.
So, but they have a relationship already, right?
They had a relationship, but it's been rocky since the beginning.
Ah, okay.
Because Juliana is married, and the husband doesn't know. It's not a lavender marriage. It's he doesn't know. We don't know exactly what goes on between Richard and Juliana. That she's very quiet about that. And so in this thing, she's kind of shocked to be staying in the same room with Al. And kind of like one point she gets upset and she says, we're not Cheryl and Mercy, who are two women they know who do live together. Uh-huh. And she doesn't know how. And then she finally says, Al thinks she doesn't want to be with her, but she doesn't mean it that way. She's just, when she explains later, she says, I know how to be with a man on a trip like this. I don't know how to be with you on a trip. I don't know what to do. And that's kind of, there's no lessons for that. Uh-huh. She's not sure how to behave or how to be herself in this situation. But by the time they get to Paris, it's working out. And they get very close. They do end up spending a lot of time in bed and working out a lot of the issues they've had in the past. And one of the friends in the book that they've had, who kind of poses as a man sometimes, has an act. He does this kind of what we call today drag king. Uh-huh. Has also used to date Juliana and shows up every once in a while in the book. It upsets Al, and she reveals to Juliana that she's decided to have an operation and make a change. Now this is early, but the first transgender change was with a man. Mm-hmm. It's very secret, but it was done with a man. And so she's gotten in touch with the first surgeon, who was in England. And so that little part there is for the transgender community is not comfortable because they do make fun. They make fun, they get very comfortable because this is not something that lesbians handle well. Uh-huh. This long history of tension with transgender community, and then the whole world didn't handle it well. Yeah. When this come out, so there was a lot of jokes and meanness and that kind of stuff. So there's a kind of that I wanted to with this history. I want to portray it accurately. It's not now. It's then. It's 1955. People are learning. So I want to show that progression of change, and how attitudes change, how things change. And so that's in there. But Al also wonders, because she's often had masculine thoughts. She wonders about herself quietly, never speaking to Juliana. And so they, that's basically where the characters are going. They're trying to think. I'm into book 4 now, which I'll be hopefully bringing out not too long. Juliana is. The reason that they're in Paris is because Juliana had a major flop in New York. Her husband, this is complicated if you don't read about it. Her husband is actually the one who, in name, is her manager, not Al. But Al does all the decision making. But this one time, her husband signs Juliana to be in a play. But it's not a musical. It's a regular straight play. She's never done it before, and she really bombs miserably. And so she decides she's never going to do Broadway ever again. Okay, it was a horrible experience, and she's a fabulous singer. She'll never do it again. Well, somebody approaches Al on the ship with a Broadway show. He wants her to do it, but Al can't convince Juliana to do it. She says, "No, I'm never going on a Broadway stage ever again. That was a horrible experience." And it turns out then that the guy who approached her is actually threatening to out them. She doesn't do it. So there's a whole thing that happens around that kind of thing.
So it feels like the series is intended to bring the reader along through a tour of queer life of the later 20th century. Are you planning to follow the characters for quite a ways?
Yeah, I want to go into the 2000s.
Ah, okay.
So there'll be like late 80s and 90s when it'll finish. I want them to see the changes and see what they think about it. And of course there'll be new characters entering, because some characters that were in book 1 have left. They may come back, and other new characters will enter. People will have children along the way, and those children, so it'll be
a real family saga sort of thing.
Yeah, there is a kind of thing. This is because besides Juliana and Al, there's Max, who's been in since the beginning. He's not on the ship with them, but he runs the nightclub where Al works, and he's been with a mentor to Al since the beginning. So I have gay men in the thing. Because in the beginning of around the 40s and 50s, the LGBT community was pretty tight with each other. The men and the women were together. In the Mattachine Society, actually, the women belonged to it also before they broke into. And the men helped the women pull together the Daughters of Elias. They were part of that. So there wasn't this split that tends to be now. And now there's coming together a little bit more now, I think. But there was a big time that happened in the 70s where everything went. Yeah. So I'm going to be showing that, why. And I like to look at history, and history makes sense when you can look at it from a distance. Makes sense. And so I'm trying to look at what was going on that made these things make sense.
So do you have a background as a historian, or is it coming out just through the writing? Have you always had an interest in history?
My father was big at reading history. He read history all the time, and it's funny. Both my sister and I have a love of history. She took it. She's doing Victorian and that kind of stuff. I teach psychology, but there's a course I teach that has influenced me a lot. I didn't develop it, I just got it. And it shows how societies and people change over time, and that there's a process that goes. It's called minority social influence. It's going on. What's nice is you can see it happening right now in our country right now. The struggle with racism, for instance, that struggle is part of minority social influence. It's changing people. It's not just a fight. Yeah. It's changing people. It's going to change it in the right direction. It's just going to take time. So I like to watch that, and you can see it if you do history, especially modern history, that you can actually practically touch. I can remember from my mother, father, and that. Then you can see it actually happening, and how it's different now, but it's not. Everything's not different, and I don't know. You can watch history happening right in front of you. And I love that. I love that.
I'm always interested in the challenges that authors face when writing about sexuality in other eras. Was that something that you struggled with, or was that something that seemed to come naturally?
It was a problem because of one of the things, clothes. They wear so many. They wear so many clothes. Even if you talk about the 50s, they wore, girdles and bullet bras and just clothes, slips. They didn't wear pants. And that kind of stuff. Just the logistics of it is part of it, but also the way they talked about it and the language. I have a book on the history of sexual language.
Uh-huh.
I have weird books to refer to things like when and figure out when they changed the terminology.
Yes.
And how did that change and stuff. So that just the language, the terminology. Sex is sex, I think, and people, but how does it work when in a different time period? So.
Yeah, and I mean, what I find researching history is that sex isn't just sex. That there are clear different attitudes towards even what is sex, as opposed to things that are fun to do that aren't sex, and that's really fascinating.
Well, the whole thing about whether lesbian sex was sex—that's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues that came up in the 70s. Was a big fight.
Yeah.
In the 70s that, lesbian sex didn't count because it wasn't sex, because it didn't involve a penis.
Well, that's a very old attitude.
Right, and I don't think they would have that in the 50s because nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
See, nobody would be talking, but there is that attitude, the girls are just doing things because they're getting ready for the real sex, real thing.
They're practicing.
In the 50s, they would care about it a little bit more because it was not a way to be, that they did not, they thought it was perverted, and they had, I have some books that were written in the 50s, like one guy, a psychiatrist, who talked about that being a lesbian could lead to criminal behavior,
mm-hmm.
kleptomania. I had a whole list of things, that's I use that in book 3. I have it started in book 2 and goes into book 3 as this idea that it's going to do some terrible thing to, they use these case examples of things, a woman who's a lesbian who bashes her husband on the head and then goes and plays bridge, and right now I find it funny. It's just like, yeah, right.
Yeah, the whole idea that once you have no morals, then anything is possible,
Right, that's it. And to be a lesbian was to be immoral, and then everything else was possible. That's exactly what, and so I try to portray that kind of attitude, throughout the books, and that's what makes it so hard. You don't want anybody to know that you're one of those.
Yeah. So where did the idea for these characters come from? Did the characters drive the story, or did you have an idea of wanting to do this large historic arc?
I wanted to do a history. I don't ever remember having a plan to do a long. I didn't know what it was going to be. I basically the two main characters, Juliana and Al, kind of just appeared,
mm-hmm.
And they've just stuck with me. And I don't know. They've been kind of running the story.
Uh-huh.
I've been very lucky with this because I just sort of sit down and they kind of let me know where it's going to go.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't happen with everything I write with this,
So did you go to Paris to do research? Did you use that as an excuse for a trip?
Actually, I did go to Paris. The thing is, it's very different than it was in the 50s.
Well, of course, yes.
So some of the places I knew, and I visited some of the places that they go to, some of the cafes and stuff. But of course, I had pictures of stuff, and I had to keep reading things that about places that that they might have gone to that was particularly. One thing I learned about Paris is during the 50s, it was not a haven for gays either. It wasn't any better than here. Well, this much better.
Uh-huh.
They had a couple of in the books they go to a lesbian nightclub, a bar. It's a club. They don't call it a bar, where they can dance.
Uh-huh.
And stuff. And they had them in the U.S. too, hidden away. and this is kind of hidden away, but they didn't have, like, the guys were being arrested regularly. They didn't arrest the women because they didn't really take the women seriously.
Uh-huh.
They arrested the guys, and they sometimes raided. It wasn't illegal in France to be gay like it was here. But for men, it was illegal for them to dance with another man, which is very strange. And so they would sometimes raid the clubs and arrest the men. But they were not okay about lesbians. There was lots of mean things said and lots of mean things in newspapers and telling people watch out for those bad people and stuff. It wasn't a nice place. It wasn't the 20s. It was the 50s. So and the 20s happened with really upper class people living in a different kind of artsy environment. It wasn't for everybody.
Yeah, there's always been a lot of class difference in how you experienced sexuality.
Right, yeah.
So when I was trolling through your Amazon listings, I spotted a play that you've written that also has a historical context. Uh-huh. So for the audience, this is a play about the life of 17th century Italian abbess Benedetta Carlini, which is a name that I have mentioned time and again on the podcast. Why don't you refresh people's memories about why she would be a figure you might write about?
Oh, she's the first lesbian we got a written record of. She actually, she was discovered by the what's her first name?
Judith Brown.
And found her in a library in Italy, I think, and found these records of this lesbian nun of this trial that she was on trial for doing lots of what they thought was bad things, and it was the first time we had a record of a lesbian behavior. So that's, and I found
there are earlier ones, but I'll let you go with this one for now.
So I'd love to hear about other records you have.
Yeah, well, I think also Brown was writing about her at a time when a lot of the other material hadn't been published yet. So we know a lot more earlier examples now. But hers was published in the 80s, so maybe more have come out. I would love to know your sources. Oh well, follow my blog.
Okay, I will, because I love to write about that, and I really, really enjoy writing this story. It got me into a different language, a sound of language, and
so what part of the story are you depicting in the play?
It starts off when she's going to be examined, so that's the thing that's happening. Is that they're coming in to give her an exam to find out if she's a mystic or not. And I use the same kind of characters that touched me in the book, but they're not necessarily exactly, like there was the father, Paolo Ricordati is in there, and he was her father confessor. And then there was the kind of a mayor, religious something. Anyway, they come in to examine her. Paolo Ricordati has a kind of crush on her. That's not part of it. Then as they're doing the trial and everything, the story from different perspectives gets unfolded through the nuns that are there and what they saw and what they witnessed and what this one happened. So you kind of unfold the story that way.
Because it was initially because she was having mystic experiences and visions and stigmata and
what's his name? Spellatino.
Splendatello,
which is
that she thought she was being essentially possessed by an angel, and she would claim that the sexual activity she was having with women were really the angel doing it.
Right. So that's all in there. It's like when he comes in, she immediately goes into these mystic kind of things, and it upsets him that one of the provost is totally upset about her reaction. But through it all, then she has the woman that who's the other woman that she has sex with?
I'm not remembering at the moment, but yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, so her companion.
Have the with me, but anyway, she tells the story and says, "Oh, but it was." She was being, Jesus showed up, and all of this kind of stuff. And then I leave Splendatello to the end because I'm the provost is starting to go. First he doesn't believe her, Then he started to believe her, and then Splenatello shows up, and he's like, oh my God. And then the whole thing, but then the sexual thing is revealed last between the two women, which blows the whole thing, which then, they condemn her. So I have to do it in certain, so that it's builds suspense and, and pushes the audience too as to what to think about her.
Yeah, it's very hard to know what to think about her, whether she was having a breakdown because of the conflict over her sexuality, or whether, the whole thing is very entwined together, but, so have you ever had the play staged?
Oh yeah, it won, it was a finalist in, for Vanda Award.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was cool. It's published, by Original Works. It was in the International, New York City, Festival.
Yeah, I wish I'd been aware of it, because somewhere on my social media was asking for lesbian-themed plays to use for a school project, and I wish I'd known about it to mention it.
I have two of them.
Oh.
I have another one, also nuns, but it's a modern one. Yeah, I have one is a one act, and this one's a long one. It's been also staged in Minnesota. I don't know the company, but they took some gorgeous pictures. I think it's on my website.
Oh, and I'll mention the title of the play for our listeners. It's Vile Affections, which is a phrase that comes out of the trial transcripts. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's also from the Bible, Romans, and I use that. The priest, when he finds out about sex, is screaming "vile affections" and does some of the Roman citations from it.
So you mentioned you're working on the 4th Juliana book. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, or are you one of those authors who doesn't like to talk about current projects?
Well, it's kind of hard to talk about now. Just yes, I don't know that I can. I don't know that I think it's coming along interesting. A lot of things are.
Do you have a title yet?
Yes, actually, I do, which is unusual, but I do. I have a title for both. 2 books, book 4 and 5. I didn't know I haven't started 5. I know what the title is. Book 4 is "Heaven is to Your Left." That's the title of the play that Juliana is going to be doing in book 4, and it's the title of the book, which has some meaning.
Is your writing mostly focusing on the Juliana series right now, or do you have other projects that you'd like to do?
I'm focused mostly on Juliana, but I want to do a couple spin-offs from the Juliana series. Like, for instance, in the first book, there's a character, Danny, who is Al's original boyfriend when she comes to New York City, and he realizes that he's gay during the thing. And I am fascinated by how many gay women and men date each other before they know who they are. Before they know they're gay, they end up dating each other. I don't know, that happens to a lot of people.
I wonder if it's because people are picking up on the sense that they're not going to have things expected of them that they don't want to give.
It's maybe, my first passion of my life was a gay boy. It's like, and there was a part, kind of a knowing. It wasn't, I don't know. I think I liked what I loved about him was he was feminine, and so he was as close as I can get to a woman without being with a woman. And so anyway, but so I'm kind of interested in that idea anyway. And so anyway, he discovers that he's gay, but he's ashamed of it. He's like very tormented about it. So he leaves. He joins the army. It's World War II. Joins the army. And we don't see him again. I'm going to write his story in the army. I think that'd be interesting for me. And I'll have some interesting lesbians, who are in the wax and stuff to deal with and stuff. So I want to do that. Then I'm very interested. Also, I've become very interested in LGBT life in the 30s and late 20s. And I have some characters that would have been alive at that time. Even Juliana, she comes into the scene around 16 years old, which would be interesting to see her that young at some point. And so I'm thinking about writing that era at that time. That interests me. So those are some spin-offs I want to do. And I don't know. I'm really into this history thing with gay history. It's just very interesting.
Well, I certainly think so. If people wanted to follow you online through social media, or do you have a website?
Oh yeah, my website is www.vandawriter.com. And I'm also on Facebook.com/Vanda Writer. That's my author page.
So I'll put links to all of your books and to your social media in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast. See the show notes for links to people and topics. Most shows will have a transcript linked as well. If you have a book announcement, a topic suggestion, or might like to appear on the show, please drop me an email. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and consider supporting our Patreon.